Good afternoon and welcome to the August 10th Safe Communities Committee meeting. We've got three of our committee members, and there is our Vice Chair, Ms. Edgemere. So we've got four of our committee members, one visiting council member. Ms. Watlington is unable to join us today, but we will get her up to speed later. We've got two topics today, neither for a vote, but both informational. We originally were not going to have an August committee meeting, but I think with a lot of the discussion we were having on council around combating the unsafe speeding, I wanted to go ahead and get an update on that while it was still fresh in our minds. And then Mr. Rios is here to give us a violence interrupter program update. I know many of us have heard from folks in the community wanting to hear where a lot of those efforts stand as well. So we'll cover both of those bases today. And Ms. Kunze, is there anything we need to cover before we jump into our conversation with CMPD?
No, I think you covered the agenda overview well, and I think we should just go ahead and proceed.
All right, we'll do introductions starting with the committee members, then other council members, and any staff that are in the room and then on the call. So I'm Larkin Eggleston. I'm the chair of the Safe Communities Committee.
I'm Dimple Ajmera, vice chair of the Safety Committee and at-large member.
Renee Johnson.
Rick Phipps. Okay, go ahead.
Renee Johnson, District 4.
Rick Phipps, at-large committee member.
Ed Driggs, visiting council member.
Federico Rios, Office of Equity, Mobility, and Immigrant Integration.
Good afternoon, Emily Kunze, City Manager's Office.
Donata Jackson, Office of Constituent Services.
And any others that we've got on the call.
Yeah, Johnny Jennings, Charlotte Mecklenburg Police.
Dave Johnson, Major, Special Operations Bureau, CMPD.
Brent Wally, Lieutenant, Transportation Division.
All right. Appreciate everybody being here. And Chief Jennings, if you and your team want to kick us off to talk about combating unsafe speeding and potential technology solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We do have a presentation available that we're going to present. Major Johnson will be taking over the lead in that and will be available for any questions afterwards. Major?
Good afternoon, everybody. We appreciate this opportunity to kind of present what we see as the state of affairs with speeding and traffic enforcement here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg. We're going to talk about what our enforcement activity looks like, some technology issues, both past, present, and kind of where we see the technology going in the future. Speeding, distracted driving, and driving while impaired are some of the leading factors in crash fatalities and serious injury crashes here in Mecklenburg County. In 2020, the Major Crash Unit investigated 81 traffic-related fatalities. So far this year to date, the Major Crash Unit has investigated 45 fatalities. So you can see we're on track to meet or exceed the number of fatalities that we even had last year, which was an increase. Nationally, to add some context to this, traffic fatalities in 2020 were up nationally 7%. Here in North Carolina, they were up 12% in 2020, and that's despite a double-digit decrease in the total number of miles driven, both nationally and on the state level. Here in Mecklenburg County, here at home, in 2020, 54 people died in crashes involving cars that were speeding at least 20 miles over the speed limit. And here, just in the last 2 weeks, CMPD has investigated 10 traffic-related fatalities, and at least 7 of those speed played some factor in the reason for that crash. We really believe that it's time to recognize speed-related motor fatalities as a public health crisis. Next slide. During the onset of the COVID lockdown, we saw the streets open up as folks weren't going to school and they weren't going to work. And then you couple that with the fact that many of our officers were diverted into dealing with civil unrest that was taking place during that time. And the highways really turned into an open opportunity for folks to speed. Now, with more people returning to work and the streets getting busier, we see that kind of in 2 ways. It's certainly an opportunity for more danger to present itself with folks that are speeding and driving recklessly. But we also know that congestion and some traffic engineering items can also help to curb that and can reduce overall speeds and create a safer environment in some cases. But during that time, our enforcement and traffic violations did not stop. We know that every ticket we write adds to the backlog of court cases at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse, considering the fact that they've been operating on a limited basis and have a significant backlog. But so far in 2021, CMPD has made over 47,000 traffic stops year to date, which is a 31% increase over what we accomplished in 2020, and is very close to our 5-year average in number of traffic stops. So we have rebounded well on the traffic enforcement side, and those 47,000 traffic stops this year equates to about 1,500 traffic stops per week conducted across the city by just our agency alone. Next slide. The transportation unit here at CMPD, which consists of our motorcycle unit, our major crash detectives, and our DWI task force officers. They really focus on our 30 high injury network corridors as part of Charlotte's Zero Vision plan. Those 30 corridors are determined by CDOT and are based on a formula that considers the number of serious motor vehicle accidents with injury, any accident involving pedestrians, and any fatality. And they apply that to an algorithm, and they give us the 30 corridors in which we focus our patrols. Those operations can be seatbelt operations, DWI checkpoints, radar and speeding, or saturation patrol, where we are really looking for any type of traffic violation in that particular area. At the division level, the complaints and the traffic enforcement is really driven by citizen complaints, and we see those coming from folks in the neighborhoods complaining about speeding, stop sign violations, or past school buses. And those are really is how our division focuses, and how those neighborhood complaints get handled are at the division level by division level patrol officers and traffic officers. We did at one time really utilize traffic enforcement to combat violent crime. We don't do that nearly as much as we did about a decade ago, really just to avoid any instances of casting too wide of a net when we go into a neighborhood to combat crime. But that is a tool that we do use from time to time.
Before you leave this slide, can you give a little bit more explanation as to what saturation patrol means for folks?
So the other operations would have a specific focus as far as the violation. So whether it's a seatbelt op, a DWI checkpoint, or a speeding op, a saturation patrol would really kind of flood that one of these corridors, one of these high injury network corridors, and really looking for any type of traffic violation. So anything goes as far as traffic violations when we conduct a saturation patrol.
Thank you.
And we usually do, just to provide some further context, about two speed operations a week at least, and then one DWI operation a week, along with some other saturation patrols and seatbelt ops. And in fact, there's one going on currently in Steel Creek Division along South Tryon Street. So public service announcement: slow down if you're on South Tryon Street. Next slide, we're going to talk about 3 specific operations in which we've collaborated with some other agencies and engaged them to help us with some of the speed enforcement. On Thursday, May 20th, we conducted a speed enforcement operation on I-485 in the Mallard Creek Prosperity Road area. The agencies involved were our motorcycle unit, the North Carolina State Highway Patrol, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, Huntersville PD, and traffic officers from some of our other CMPD divisions. During that particular operation, there were 121 violations or citations issued, and 80 of those were for speeding. On Monday, May 24th, we did a kind of a unique traffic enforcement. It was the border-to-border operation. We conducted this along Highway 74 at the Gaston County line. CMPD units worked the Mecklenburg County side of the Gaston County line, and the Gaston County units worked their side of the line. The agencies involved were CMPD, the Mecklenburg County Sheriff's Office, Belmont, Gastonia, Randlow, Cramerton, Dallas, and Gaston County PDs, and the Gaston County Sheriff's Office. There were 93 violations handed out that day. 51 of those were for speeding. And next slide. So Thursday, July 15th, most recently, we conducted a nighttime traffic saturation, which again is for looking for any type of traffic violation along several of our high injury network corridors. The DWI task force and division officers, along with the Matthews PD, conducted that operation. 130 violations were handed out. 64 of those were for speeding. And I'll say, in conjunction with talking about our enforcement activities, the one thing that we know decreases speeding is frequent and visible enforcement. If folks see blue lights, or they know there's a chance that they might get pulled over and charged for speeding, they will slow down. So that's the one thing that we know for sure deters this.
Before we move into the next section of this, let me see if we've got any questions. And my one comment, and if folks will raise their hand in the WebEx, I'm keeping an eye on that, and I'll recognize you. One comment I would have would be, I think it's helpful for us to know that these things are going on, and I can imagine that there might be reason that you wouldn't want to advertise in advance what was going to take place when and where. But I think on the back end of these sorts of efforts taking place, if that's information that could be shared with council members, I can imagine that every council member on this call, like I have, has been asked about what's being done around how dangerous our streets have gotten. And so I would imagine that Mr. Phipps and Ms. Johnson, for example, the Mallard Creek and Prosperity Church, if that's one they knew about, that's something they can point to for folks in those corridors that are asking them what steps the city and what steps CMPD is taking. So if there's a way that that could be communicated out to council after the fact, I think that's useful information for us to be able to take to our community meetings. And I see Mr. Phipps has his hand up. Mr. Phipps?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chief and CMPD officers for this report. I took note of the fact that you mentioned some stepped up enforcement and some violations noted, but I also am concerned about what I read in the paper about the Mecklenburg County prosecutors with the backlog that they have. A lot of these tickets, especially for speeding, are being, I don't know if they're being dismissed or reduced somewhat. So I know you have to share some level of frustration in the fact that if you're making these stops and issuing these violations, we still have a lot of them that seems to be, downgraded or whatever. So, and we had a big article in the Observer talking about the resources and things. So while these efforts are much needed, it seems that we still have a big problem in terms of enforcement and follow through with respect to speeding, excessive speeding in the city. So I don't know, do you share the frustration of the fact that these citations are being written, but it looks as if with the current backlog that a lot of them, are not, I don't know if they're receiving the severity of attention that they need to, given some of the statistics you raised in terms of accidents and fatalities and such.
Yeah, thank you, Councilman Phipps, for that. Absolutely. I think we share frustration just as the district attorney shares frustration with the limited resources he has to be able to prosecute not just speeding violations, but even the violent crimes that we deal with. However, there are some things that are on the horizon that are promising that will bring citations up into the 21st century, so to speak, so that with e-citations that we're looking at and where there will be opportunities down the road where the paper citations will pretty much go away. And then you can do a lot of, as we found through COVID, there's a lot of things that we can do and accomplish without actually appearing in person. So hopefully that will mainstream some of this. But the frustration also for us is just even with the operations that you see and the things that we've done, we can't be everywhere, and it's impossible to be able to be at all the locations where we get complaints of speeding. So we have to really be methodical in how we do that. And also, these things are. We talked about notifications, and we can probably do some things to make sure that you individually are notified. But we don't keep secret a lot of these operations. We'll put out there that the DWI task force will be at a certain location, because to us, issuing 130 violations or citations is not a victory. The victory is if we can get people to slow down, or we can get people to not drink and drive at all. So we don't always look to surprise people with these operations. We'll put warnings out in advance on many of them.
And Mr. Phipps, I'd like to note the irony that we're trying to get people to slow down, and you've got your Bubba Wallace racing hat on. So I appreciate that humor on your part, whether intentional or not. Ms. Ajmera, you had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I have two comments. Number one, similar to what Mr. Phipps just alluded to around backlog and following through. I understand that there is with the budget concerns with our district attorney's office, there is a backlog, and but what I'm trying to find out, or maybe if there is data that CMPD can help us with, is once the violation has been issued, do you see that deterring folks from speeding, whether there is a follow through or not. I know some cases are being dismissed and so on. So I'm just trying to understand, because our end goal is to, as Chief had just mentioned, that our end goal is to reduce speeding and make roads safe for all our residents. So I'm just trying to understand, if there is no follow through, is it really working, or just by issuing a violation, is it helping us with reducing the speed on the road?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question for me to just answer. But what I can tell you is what we can look at is recidivism when it comes to speeding. How many people we are writing tickets multiple times, and probably even in the same locations, whether that's their route to and from work, if they're speeding every day. And also looking at fatalities or crashes in the areas where we're doing the work. And seeing how effective that is. But that is something that we can probably put some information together and make sure we share that with council.
Yes, and to follow on that, is there a data available for how many cases that are being dismissed or have been prolonged?
Yeah, I'm sure there is, and we can look for that. And what I do know, I just because I happened to see a speeding ticket not long ago from one of our officers wrote that we used to write them out a couple of weeks out for their court date, and I've seen one recently that was the court date was December, and so to be able to push those out that far in advance is kind of indicative of how backlogged we are with these. But there are some things that we can take a look at and see where are these tickets going, and are we but I haven't heard a whole lot, and Major can weigh in on this. I haven't heard a whole lot of dismissals when it comes to citations, so I don't know if you have any more information.
We do see more than dismissals. We see reductions in the charges, or they plead to a lesser offense, which reduces the amount of their fine. So we do see that. I don't have any hard data for that, but we do see that over and over again. And it's really a matter of scale at the courthouse. They're pushing through thousands of violations in a single court session, right? So they have to do that as expeditiously as they can, and we understand that. But it does create some level of frustration on our part, for sure.
And I think that's something we really need to take to Ms. Ashmere and Mr. Phipps' point about the bandwidth limitations that are not only our DA has, but the court system. That's something we've really got to spend some time on in our Intergovernmental Relations Committee, because those resources largely come from the state level, and Mecklenburg and Wake County in particular. And I'll ask Ms. Jackson or Ms. Kunze to share with the entire council, if you haven't seen it, the article from last month, the series of articles from last month in the Observer, that it did have a lot of the data. It had a lot of the data around the number of cases that, to the point that was just made, aren't necessarily being dismissed, but are being reduced to improper equipment, which is a tool that was supposed to be used for people kind of as a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card. If they're doing maybe 10 or 15 or 20 miles an hour over the speed limit, it's being used for people who are doing much more than that, and it's being used repeatedly by the same people. So we do see these repeat offenders over and over and over again, and they had several examples of folks who had multiple violations doing like 30, 40 miles an hour over the speed limit over the course of just a couple of years. So it's probably not going to change. We certainly have our part to play as the police department, but it's not going to change if we don't have the resources we need in our courts and don't have the resources that our district attorney needs to be able to actually hold those folks accountable. So I hope that that's something we can take up in intergovernmental relations and maybe add some oomph to our legislative agenda around that issue. Ms. Ashmere, did you have other comment or question?
Yeah, so it's great that we can have a follow-up conversation in intergovernmental committee, but what I want to do is make sure that we use the data, and if there is a correlation in the backlog and how that impacts or that doesn't help us with making our roads safer, we really need to address that sooner. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is if there is any correlation in data, and I know CMPD is going to provide that. The second question I have is around high injury networks. I know there are 30 that you had mentioned, Chief. So could you provide us a list of that? I mean, you don't have to provide that now, but in a follow-up report, if you could just send us that. Is that the CDOT high injury network, or are we using something? Are we using another data set for high injury networks?
No, you're correct, and we do have that readily available. We can get that to you rather quickly.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we can move into the next piece around potential technology solutions.
Mr. Chair, it's Ed. Can I
sorry.
ask a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't see your hand. I'm sorry.
I didn't have it up. I'm just barging in. We hear a lot of loud motors traveling at high speed on 485 down here in South Charlotte at night. Is there any point in calling 911, or what should somebody that is troubled by that do in the hopes of getting intervention?
So the quick answer is yes. So that's how we are able to track these types of problems, is with an increase in 911 calls, and we can go back and track those calls by location and see where those calls are coming in and determine where our problem spots are. So yes, the challenge with that, though, is by the time you call that into a location and the officer gets there, even if it's within a couple minutes, the problem's moved on to somewhere else.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge in enforcing that.
Would you have to communicate with Highway Patrol if it's on 485, or could CMPD actually tackle that?
No, not necessarily. It's within our jurisdiction, so we can respond to that.
Right. And Mr. Chair, I just wanted to reinforce your point about funding for the courts. The state, North Carolina, has a budget surplus this year of $6 or $7 billion. So there's an abundance of money. And I don't know what games are being played here, or whether this is intergovernmental and they're trying to shift costs to the county. But I think beyond the speeding issue, the need for more capacity in the court system is obvious. And it's a public safety issue on several levels. So I guess we can talk to our colleagues in intergovernmental relations, but I'm really curious to know what the rationale is for reducing the number of attorneys by one in the current budget process.
And if I'm absolutely, if I'm correct, that actually has been rectified. They're not going to reduce by one. That was changed, but it does not address your point, which is that not only was it absurd that we would potentially reduce the number of people in our DA's office, but we actually need a significant increase, because this is not obviously just a traffic issue. This is all the things that are going through our court system. This cuts across every layer of community safety when we can't hold people accountable who are committing egregious crimes. So,
also, it's a chronic issue. I mean, I remember talking to Peter Gilchrist before I even took office, and they were working with antiquated technology. They were understaffed and underfunded, and it just makes no sense to me, given the sensitivity about crime and public safety, that we're shortchanging that function. So we can work on that some more outside of this committee, but it is obviously an issue for this committee as well.
Definitely, yes.
yeah, I think underfunded courts and DA's office here is a tale as old as time, but it's getting worse, and I think we're seeing the results of that in some of the things that are occurring in our community. So agreed on that front. All right, if we can go on to the next section.
Very good. So before we move on, I just want to say, and I rarely publicly commend the Charlotte Observer, but I do agree with the chairman's comments on that series of articles. If you want to get a really good understanding of the scope of this issue, there's a 3-part series that they wrote in June that's very comprehensive and well written. On the technology front, we're going to talk about what we have currently. In addition to our traditional handheld radar and LiDAR units, we do have radar speed signs that we can put up in a temporary location. They're very similar to the picture that you see on the slide. They are solar operated, and the benefit to this is it gives a visual reminder, immediate visual reminder, and then it also collects speed data for us. So it's a speed traffic measuring device. It has some memory capability that we can put this up in an area, get some speed measurements, conduct some traffic enforcement, and then go back, put this back up in an area and see if our efforts were fruitful or not. We've got, I think, 2 of those right now. Those cost about $4,500 a piece. Then to talk a little bit historically, next slide, please. Some of you may remember in 2003, we deployed some speed vans, radar vans, to do some traffic enforcement by camera. The state legislature enacted a statute that allowed us to do that in 2003. In 2006, we had to discontinue that program because the legislation expired. And since then, there has been very little appetite on the part of the legislature to allow this type of program to exist. Next slide. The challenges statutorily were that for a radar for a speeding charge, and to use radar as a speeding charge, that radar device has to be manned by a officer who uses the radar to visually confirm their own observation of speeding, is how the statute is written. So an officer observes a vehicle he thinks is speeding, he verifies that with the radar device, and can then speed or charge that person with the traffic violation. So even though we had the radar vans that were automated with cameras, we had to have an officer sitting in those vans at all times, which of course presented a challenge. And also there was an issue with the revenue that came in from those fines were not enough to support the program and provide the 90% requirement to the school board. So that was another issue as far as funding that was really mandated statutorily by the state. However, I will say we know that it worked. There was an NC State study that was conducted during those years that said that there was a 55% decrease in speeding for speeds over 10 miles an hour over the speed limit in the corridors where we utilize the radar vans. So we do know that they work. We just have some challenges with the state in getting statutes and getting legislation passed to allow us to be able to use that type of technology. Next slide. Red light cameras. We have some experience with that here in Charlotte as well. The only cities we know of that are still using red light cameras are Raleigh, Fayetteville, and Greenville. And as we mentioned, because of the state statutes, there are no cities using speed vans or speed cameras. But there are some states, New York State and Maryland in particular, that I know about that are using automated speed enforcement equipment and technology, and they're doing so very successfully. And I will let Lieutenant Wally kind of talk about where we see the technology going in the future.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the slide you see here discusses a little bit about artificial intelligence as it applies to enforcement and management. The best that I could compare this to currently is the cameras that operate on our toll roads. When a person goes through one of the toll stations, cameras affixed to the pole will verify how many people are in the car, which is fed if someone has turned off or turned on their transponder. That data is fed back to the toll lane operator, where a person will visually confirm and say, yes, there was 4 people in the car, you could have your transponder on. No, there was 1 person in the car and you were illegally operating the transponder, and then the fine or fee would change how much the person was to be charged. So in this particular incident, same technology using cameras to verify if people are wearing their seatbelts. And as the major said, this same technology could be used and is being used elsewhere for speed cameras, but here in North Carolina, we just would need somebody to visually confirm who they see driving the car when recording someone's speed. This technology, as far as AI, is being used in a very limited basis here in the United States. For example, algorithms that go into computer systems for traffic management. This is more technology-based overseas right now and is first coming on the horizon there.
So, yeah, I have
All right,
a question.
hold on, Mr. Phipps.
Okay, all right.
Raise your hand, I'll get you in the order. Officers, are y'all, we wrapped on this slide, or this?
Yeah, we're all
presentation?
wrapped up on that. We'll take any questions that you have.
Okay, and I'll note something from this slide that both with the enforcement we are utilizing now and the technology we envision possibly using in the future, I'm as important as seatbelts are. I'm far less concerned with that because that's a poor decision that puts the person making the poor decision at risk. A lot of what I think we hear largely from our constituents is the poor decisions and dangerous action that people are taking that puts others at risk, innocent people at risk. And so the excessive speeding, and I think you said 55% reduction when we had the access to the speed van. So this is going to be another one that's going to require some partnership and some lobbying in Raleigh, because if we're not able to use, and it should be a bipartisan issue, frankly, because I think regardless of which side of policing type issues you might fall on, I think most people would agree that minimizing the number of negative interactions that have to take place between an officer and a citizen is a good thing. I think most people would also acknowledge that we have severely overburdened our police officers in taking something off of their plate that could be handled by a technology solution or maybe an unsworn person would be beneficial to the officers and their ability to focus on what's really the core of their job. So I don't see why this would need to be partisan in any way, but it will certainly require partnership in Raleigh. And Ms. Ajmera first, and then Mr. Phipps.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with what you just said about technology. And again, this is another item for intergovernmental committee and see if this needs to go on our state legislative agenda. For red light camera, I know other cities have that program in place. I know we had it, and then I guess it wasn't renewed. I would like to get an update on our red light camera program. Why are we not? Why do we not have that program anymore? I know we have had a couple of folks to reach out to us to implement this program again. And I know our school system a couple of years ago, some school advocates were also pushing for that program because the revenue would support our school system. So I just would like to get an update on that. And that's all I have. Thank you.
And that's something, too, that I think the state rules dictated that the city could only keep, I believe, maybe it was 10% of the revenue off that system, and the rest went to the schools. And obviously, if we can create additional revenue for our school system, I think that's a benefit. But I believe, and Chief, jump in, or anybody jump in here if something has changed or I missed the detail here, but as I recall, the reasoning that we moved away from the program was because the percentage that we were allowed to keep from the revenue of those tickets didn't nearly cover the cost of the actual technology and implementing the program. So, I don't think that any of us are looking to create an additional revenue stream for the city by issuing citizens tickets. But I do think that it's reasonable for us to be able to expect that we could at least recoup the cost of implementing the technology and have it be a break-even solution for us financially, and then hopefully a windfall for the schools if it's a windfall for anybody.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can step in also, two things with that. One, it was proven that it did not decrease any traffic fatalities by having the red light cameras. The other one was, you did kind of hit on it, the revenue was not going to the school board or the school system as it was intended. Basically, the vendor who installed the red light cameras were the only one. They were actually profiting and making money off of it, and the percentage that was supposed to go to school board was not. It was not happening. So when I guess the contract wasn't renewed, and we moved on from that because of the effectiveness and the funding that was not, it was going to where it wasn't intended to go.
So to follow up on that, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
so effectiveness, could you just elaborate, Chief, on effectiveness? I know speed bans, we have seen, I guess you had presented that it works. So I'm trying to understand what contributed to red light cameras not being as effective. I'm just trying to understand a little bit more about its effectiveness.
Yeah, so you're really going into two different things. You're talking about two different things. One is running red lights at intersections that may not necessarily have anything to do with speeding. And if someone's running a red light, a lot of that could be not paying attention or trying to speed through the intersection to beat the red light, which would be a contributing factor. The red light cameras did not deter any of that activity. However, when people are aware that there are speeding vans and that they can that they have to reduce their speed to avoid to get a ticket, that is why that was more effective. And I don't know if the major has any.
Well, I would add that running red lights is not a major contributor to the reason we have traffic fatalities, right? So it's really more speeding, drunk driving, distracted driving. Those are the elements that go into why the traffic fatality number that it is. Running the red lights or trying to beat that red light, when we instituted that program, we really didn't see a decrease in fatalities in those corridors. And in fact, what we sometimes saw was an increase in accidents because folks were stopping faster because they were more concerned about getting that red light ticket. So they would stop faster and we'd see an increase in rear-end collisions. So that coupled with the revenue issues that we had in the school board prompted the dissolving of that program.
Got it. Thank you.
Mr. Phipps?
You indicated that we have several tools that we were using, the speed van being one of them, where an officer had to be in the van or whatever, and you mentioned another tool we had that it had to have an actual officer intervention. So those two things, I mean, they're basically, I mean, they're undermining the use of technology by requiring that, right? So is that a function of that there has to be physical person there that you could go and face your accuser or something, or what? Why? I mean, those things seem to me to be something that would limit the effectiveness of some of the automated tools that we could use.
Yeah, I think there is we are limiting ourselves in the technology that's available. I do want to correct, we no longer use the speed vans that went out 2016. 2006. But that's all state legislation that requires that not only if I'm using an electronic device, whether that's a radar or LiDAR, that I also have to verify that with what I physically can see. And that's what was determined why we had to be in the vans with the use of those. But you are correct. You hit a good point that I feel like we have to keep up with technology and what's available. And if we can, not just through what we can do through enforcement, but also through the court systems and what you see the courts are, how they're moving into updated technology with the e-citations and how they're going to be able to process those much quicker.
Yeah. Well, I thought back in the day when we did have red light cameras, I thought it was a study done that showed that they did have a material, a positive impact on traffic situations in the city. And how is it that Raleigh and Fayetteville and Greenville, what are they doing to get to have permission to use the speed cameras and we run into problems?
Yeah, it's not a matter of permission. It's a matter of because those with the speed vans, that's related to legislation within the state, that whether they will allow us to do it. The red light cameras is a decision, I believe, that we have to go into a contract with, but there was, if I'm not mistaken, there was some legal action taken because of where the money was actually going. The money was not going to the school board as intended, and that's the reason why the contract was dissolved when it was up, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. And those cities that do utilize it are currently under contract with those companies and have to fulfill their obligation in that regard.
Ms. Coonsey's got some more information on that as well.
I was also going to say there's some cost-sharing agreements between, like, New Hanover County, where Wilmington is, where they do have some cost sharing with the school systems, but they have a not to exceed amount, so that gets capped. And then also in Wake County, they have special legislation that allows them to clear some of the proceeds to pay for the contract. But that does not exist here in Mecklenburg County or for Charlotte. So that might be something to talk more about at the IGR committee. But I do believe it's been brought before a few years ago, and we didn't have a lot of success at the legislature.
Wow, okay. Thank you.
Ms. Johnson? Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the red light cameras also. I know, Chief Jennings, you said that the red light cameras didn't affect the numbers of fatalities, but I'm wondering if it impacted the numbers of accidents in the locations where they were located.
We'd have to go back and look at the studies that were done during that time. We can certainly follow up with you and get you that information.
Thank you, because it's surprising to me that that they weren't considered effective, and I don't know if CDOT has something to do with that. I don't know if there's timing on the light, or maybe the other light doesn't turn green for millisecond after the other one turns red. I don't know if CDOT controls that, but I would think that the red light cameras would have an impact on traffic accidents. And then also, I just want to be clear, the red light contract, it sounds like it wasn't administered as effectively as it could have been. If it were administered different and the cost sharing or the money had gone where it went, would you then consider it effective if it kind of paid for itself or if it had operated the way that it was supposed to? So I would like to see the numbers on the number of accidents in the at the intersections where the red light cameras were, for that period of time, and then afterwards. Because we know that there are intersections, in Charlotte that are high impact and have lots of accidents. So I'm surprised that red light cameras didn't impact the fatalities, but I would certainly like to see the impact on the accidents.
Yeah, and let me just say, we would never, on the CMPD side, if it's anything that can be even halfway effective, particularly if it doesn't hit the cost, if it's a cost-free initiative that we could do, that would certainly be something we'd be in favor in. We still, even with the red light cameras, there was a challenge too to being able to verify who was driving the vehicle at the time. I think the way it worked is that the owner of the vehicle ended up getting the citation, and those citations didn't go against points in your on your driver's license or anything like that. So it was basically a fine that you paid and you moved on. So, but I will say that because of the way it's done, we don't have a opinion on whether we should not do them. But I think if it's effective in any way, even a little bit, it's something very worthwhile looking into.
Chief, do you know if CDOT can control the operation? I mean, I'm sure they can. Is that done in any way? Do you know if CDOT if there's a delay in the other side or how that's done.
Yeah, there is, and that might be a better question for CDOT, but I do know there is a delay. The red lights are not simultaneous where one turns red and one turns green. If you notice, there is the red, if there's a red light, then you'll see if it has a walk don't walk signal on it as well, that will come on even before the other light turns green to allow traffic. So there is a delay in when they switch from red to green, so that you're not basically going straight from red to the other intersection going to green, if that makes sense.
It does. So, Mr. Chair, maybe we can invite CDOT to come and give a presentation if there's a way to increase the delay in certain intersections. That would certainly be a more cost-effective solution for the problem or for the problem intersection. So I'd like to hear, I just like a little information. If we can get some information from CDOT for the committee, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah, I think they could provide a lot of good information for us on traffic calming. I know that's a high priority of theirs and something that we all talk to them as council members about on a regular basis with some of the high-speed areas in our districts. So be happy.
Mr. Chair, if I could jump in as well, I think this is important because we have a really good relationship with CDOT. They actually sit in our real-time crime center where they're monitoring, and during the high traffic volume hours, they're monitoring traffic. They have several red lights across the city that they can remotely alter or change to help with traffic flow as well. So I think you would benefit from a presentation from them. Their technology is really good. I think you'd be surprised by what they can and can't do for traffic, basically remotely as well.
Yeah, we'll absolutely line that up, Ms. Johnson, for one of the next meetings or two as they're available. I know Ms. Ajmira's got one more question as well. The thing that Chief just mentioned about not being able to necessarily prove who was driving the vehicle, but issuing sort of just a civil penalty type of citation to the owner of a vehicle, it had me thinking about, we've got these cameras that are issuing civil penalties or citations for folks who are driving in a high occupancy lane, for instance, by themselves. Obviously, that's not something they're going to maybe go to court for, but it's a disincentive to break the rules. I wonder if some of these solutions, if we would have the authority to implement it as a civil penalty or simply a fine, if it was not a criminal infraction, does that make a difference in terms of what we're able to do or not? And
Is that a question for me?
It's a question for whoever can answer it, or if someone doesn't know off the top of their head, it's a question for later.
Well, I don't know the full answer to that, but what I can tell you, Mr. Chair, is the biggest deterrent is what happens with your insurance as well. So on top of, if I'm not mistaken, on the red light cameras, it was a $50 fine, and that was the end of it. And it did nothing for your, did nothing to your insurance. You paid your $50 and then you moved on. So I'm not sure how much that's a deterrent as much as knowing that now my insurance is going to go up with a moving violation. So.
Yeah, it's certainly less of a deterrent than if we could put points on someone's license, but it's more of a deterrent than no penalty.
And there's also, there's no recourse to that. I can't revoke someone's license because they were caught on a red light camera. So there, a lot of that is a huge deterrent when it comes to moving violations.
Yeah. Ms. Ajmira?
So I would like to see some numbers. So what's the cost of the program? And you don't have to respond to that right now, Chief, but that can be in our follow-up report. What is the cost of the program? And because, I'm just puzzled because other cities have still this program in place, even though they have a contract and they have to fulfill that obligation. But I'd like to understand the cost of the program and what is being the revenue that's generated, even though it had not gone to school board in the past. I'm just trying to understand what had been their collection. Thank you.
Yes, and we can get you that, but what I can tell you is there's generally no cost to the cities based on it. Is some of with particularly the red light cameras, that revenue goes back to the vendor to help cover for those costs. And the issue is how much of that now goes to the school board based on that revenue that comes back in. But we can get you the full details on that.
Oh, got it. So there's no cost to the city.
That's correct.
Okay.
Unless I'm missing something.
That's correct.
Okay, that's correct.
All right. So it was just the issue of school system not getting the percentage of the revenue. It was going all to this companies that were installing this technology. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Ms. Coonsey's got information in front of her, and it was my impression, and she says she's got something that validates it here, that we were actually losing money. We were keeping some, but not enough to cover the cost of the program.
There was a presentation done in 2018 at a strategy session, and Bob Hagerman, the city attorney at the time, said we paid CMS $4.7 million. So let's say that was $1 million on average. There were $50 citations. This is a quote. And if my math is right, that means we were collecting about $300,000 of citations per year. And if using my example before, it would cost us $25 a citation to cover both the 90% to the schools and the cost of the contractor. 25 times 300, that's $750,000 a year if we were issuing citations at the same rate that we were in 2004, 5, and 6. And to go back and answer a previous question, there is in the North Carolina Constitution, it requires clear proceeds of all penalties, forfeitures, and fines collected for any breach of penal law of the state to be paid to schools. So what they did is they went to the General Assembly in 97 and had that decriminalized so that they would be civil penalties from red light running. And so they thought that would be a workaround for the 90% to go to the schools. And then that got struck down in court. And so that's where we're back to kind of having to get some special legislative authority to work out, or to try to work out a deal with CMS, but that still could be challenged in saying that, well, CMS is contributing to some of this program with these proceeds, so are they indeed really getting 90% of the proceeds? So it's a little bit complex. Since there's been different court lawsuits that have filed along this process. But I do think that going to Raleigh is probably going to be, and possibly getting something similar to Wake County might be the best solution.
Yeah, so here, Mr. Chairman, here is one more item for our intergovernmental committee to understand, what steps that we need to take to get similar special authority as Raleigh. But I guess this whole cost structure, so Chief is saying that there is no cost, but what Ms. Kunze just said from previous reports that there is a cost. So
I think the cost comes into what has to go to the school board, if that's what I heard correctly. So based on the contract, am I correct on that? The actual equipment and the rollout of everything, there is not a cost for that. However, the contract as written, that there was a requirement that a certain amount of funds goes to the school board. And please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
I believe they get 90%, but I don't believe that the remaining 10% will cover all of the technology and, agreement of the contract. So I do think that there are excess costs that were going to be, have to be absorbed by the general fund. So I think that was part of the concern in discontinuing the program 15 years ago.
The net effect was that there was a negative impact to revenues.
Correct.
okay, yeah. So if we can just get more clarity around this, Ms. Kunze.
We'll get CDOT to come make a presentation to you to clarify all of this, because this was for minutes from 3 years ago. So we'll get some presentation to you to update all of this for you.
Yes, and who knows, the cost of the program could have changed now. So I just want to get an update on that.
Sure.
That committee could make a decision whether we should explore implementing this program or not.
And I want to reiterate to folks who are watching that this is not an effort by anybody on the Charlotte City Council to find a way to profit off of penalizing our community. But I think that, again, we need to find a solution. There ought to be a way for this to be a solution that could be revenue neutral and potentially a benefit to the schools if it's something that we can demonstrate can increase safety on our streets. So, does anybody have, we're at the end of this piece of our agenda and we're an hour in. We do still have an update from Mr. Rios on the violence interrupter program. So, are there any other final questions on the unsafe speeding issues before we move to the next portion of our agenda? Seeing none, I will thank our folks from CMPD, and I will turn it over to Mr. Rios.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members, for the opportunity to present out on our Alternatives to Violence initiative. Before I go into an update, I'll give a brief recap in relation to the initiative. So you'll remember that last year we began engaging with Cure Violence Global, an international organization based out of Chicago, to look at implementing their methodology on violence interruption, an evidence-based methodology that takes an epidemiological approach to that effort. We made an agreement with them in early fall after they produced their initial step, which was to do a review and evaluation of our crime hotspot that we had designated as the most apropos location for this initiative, which was Beatties Ford Road. After doing that, we put out an RFP seeking a local implementing organization to partner with to host this work. After going through that process, Youth Advocate Programs was selected, a national organization with a local presence that had a strong track record with working with our partner on this initiative, Mecklenburg County. Youth Advocate Programs, in turn, began the process of looking for a site supervisor. You all are aware, based on last week's press conference, that site supervisor was selected. His name is Belton Platt, an individual with a good deal of positive relationships in this community and acknowledged as someone that has a great deal of experience with the topic. Beyond that, 4 other individuals were hired. So this is the update portion. 2 violence interrupters and 2 outreach workers. The outreach workers will have a caseload of 15 individuals each. We are currently searching for an additional violence interrupter. We were methodical in allowing that spot to remain open to see if someone bubbled up in the community as a good fit for that initiative. In addition, we are, our partners at Youth Advocate Programs are securing office space along the Beatties Ford corridor. That has proven to be somewhat difficult. I am glad to share that they have office space that is only an 8-minute drive from the corridor, but we absolutely want them in the footprint. And so they are securing and finalizing a deal to hopefully be in the catchment area by no later than October 1st. We'll keep you updated on that. Very grateful for all the members of council voting last night on the approval of our reception of $1.2 million from Wells Fargo and the Greenlight Fund. These dollars were granted to us out of cycle for Wells Fargo, so this was a commitment on their end because of their belief in this initiative and the power of our work around violence interruption. And Greenlight Fund has partnered with us for this initiative to be its investment for this year. Every year they select another nonprofit work to invest in, and so they have selected us. These dollars allow us to fund 2 additional years of this program to provide network support, general capacity building, robust data collection, and a future external evaluation of the entire initiative. I will share that the Cure Violence Global folks have shared that they feel that this is this is the only instance that they can remember where an initiative like this run through government has been funded for more than 1 year. And so it's telling your commitment as committee members, as council members to this work that has gotten us really this far. We are extremely excited for the work. I'll close out by sharing that August 14th from 12 to 6, we will have our QC Fest on Beatties Ford Road at the parking lot of Northwest School of the Arts. This is an initiative in large part to share out with the community members the investment I just shared, but also to afford the individuals that make up our Alternatives to Violence team the opportunity to connect with the entire community and celebrate the work that they will be endeavoring to do. This will not be the last event. In fact, one of the facets of this work is that they will have monthly events to continually connect with the community members in the footprint that has been designated. With that, I'll open the floor to any questions that you guys may have.
I know there's going to be a couple of performances at QC Fest. Will you be doing any sort of performance, Mr. Rios?
No, sir. I can't say that I will, but I look forward to seeing Day 26 and Jay Holiday perform.
Well, and one of our colleagues has said he might start referring to himself as DJ Mally Mal.
I did hear
that was Malcolm Graham, so I don't know what he has up his sleeve, but I look forward to finding out on Saturday. Ms. Johnson?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. I heard you say that there was an open position for a violence interrupter.
Yes, ma'am.
But I wanted to know, is that a position or which position is that? Or is that an organization you're looking for? And then I have a question about the office space as well.
Yes, ma'am. So the violence interrupter position is one of the 3 roles that was designated in the evaluation. You'll remember that the evaluation stated that we needed a site supervisor, 2 outreach workers, which function like case managers. So they take on a caseload of 15 each, and then 3 violence interrupters. These are the individuals that are out and about through the evenings, connecting with individuals and being intermediaries for conflicts that may arise amongst groups. So that violence interrupter, if you think about it, is the front of the ship. They're the first person out there. They're the ones making that first initial connection. The outreach worker is really digging in deeper and having a longer term relationship with those individuals that have stated that they want out of some of the violent interactions that they may have had and want other opportunities.
But it's an individual person that is...
So you said there was 1 violence interrupter position.
Yes, ma'am. So we have 2 already on staff. We're looking for a 3rd.
And when you say we, is that the city or is the...
Great question. We've taken a calling this we, but it is a collaborative between ourselves, the city, the Mecklenburg County, our partners at the Office of Violence Prevention with the county, and YAP, Youth Advocate Programs. So Youth Advocate Programs would be bringing on the staff person. It would be their staff person. But given that this is a joint effort, we all take ownership for the initiative.
Okay. So it's not YAP that's hiring a person, because you said you're waiting for someone to kind of bubble up in the community. It's something that the city is involved or engaged in for that.
Correct. YAP would be hiring. We have been involved in the hiring panels that they have conducted to date.
Right, and then you said that we were having, or they are having a difficult time finding office space on Beatties Ford. Can you tell me why that is, please?
Well, I can give you my opinion. It's been really difficult to find space that is available at the moment that suits their needs. They're looking for office space that can house the 6 individuals total. In speaking with YAP, they would like to actually move their entire headquarters into 1 space. So that makes for the need for a larger space. And there just is not a great deal of office space available in the corridor. We've had individuals to arise and say, hey, could you take a look at this space? And it just may not meet their needs. There is 1 location that has been found, and we think we're good to go, but we have not secured a contract, so I don't feel comfortable sharing that out. And again, I'm saying we, but it is Youth Advocate Programs that is looking for this office space.
Say 8 blocks. Are we talking about an uptown office or?
No, we want office space in the footprint, Ms. Johnson. And I would also share one of the things that makes it even more difficult is this has to be office space that is open late into the evening. So for the first month, the individuals of this team will be going out between 6 to 12 p.m. But going forward, they will be going out later into the evening. This is a best practice from Cure Violence. Typically, their initiatives begin, from 12 to 8 p.m. Typically, their initiatives begin for that first month doing daytime hours, building relationship with community members. And then going into the second month, they begin going out later and later into the evening. And so it's difficult to find office space where those individuals can easily access it at any time in the evening.
Okay. I'd like to hear more about that. Maybe we can talk offline because I think, as you said, it's important that that their presence is in the corridors. So does that speak to a bigger problem, the lack of office space in that corridor? Is it a level of affordability for nonprofits? I mean, so I just like to know more about that. If there's collaboration opportunities, but that's a challenge for nonprofits overall. And this organization has, significant funding from the city. We know that. So I'd like to hear more about that. And again, perhaps this is a bigger problem that the city needs to address. If this program that we've highlighted and we're funding and we're supporting can't find office space in the area where it's needed, that sounds like that's also something for the city to address.
It sounds like you've got a potentially good lead. When will you know something on if that's going to come to fruition or not?
My hope is within the next 2 weeks to know with certainty.
Great. Mr. Phipps.
Yeah, I thought this YAP program was a city-wide initiative, but you seem to implicate that it's a corridor-driven initiative. Is that not the case?
So the initiative is beginning in the Betty's Ford corridor. This is where we are launching, for all intents and purposes, the pilot. I think there is a not secret at all hope that we would be able to expand this if it is proven effective in that corridor. But we are beginning specifically on the Betty's Ford and LaSalle corridor.
So then are you saying if we expand it, that we expected to have 5 office space locations in addition to Betty's Ford?
Well, if we were to expand it, we would have to do the process all over again. So we'd have to open up a new RFP. There is no surety that which organization would be selected and where their office space may be located to do the initiative. So it could be that is something that is specific to the need as we continue to move forward.
You said it was, 8 minutes away, this proposed location. 8 minutes could put you in University City, could put you somewhere uptown, or the west
8 minutes
side,
ain't gonna get you to University City unless you're one of these people we were talking about driving unsafely earlier.
Unless you're Bubba Wallace, you're probably not getting there that fast. But it is 8 minutes away. It is on the west side of Charlotte. It is at a local church that has allowed their space to be utilized all hours of the night as necessary until a space is located on the Betty's Ford.
That's where they are currently. That's not the potential lead that you referenced.
Correct. This is their temporary housing while we wait to get the cemented space on the corridor.
Thank you.
Mr. Phipps, we're going to need you to slow down on 85, it sounds like. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I do. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am.
I know that, one of the requests or requests from City Council, I know from me for sure, was that a local organization was considered for this contract. So youth advocate programs, they were currently providing services in Charlotte, correct?
Yes, ma'am. They were
So-
providing They are providing programming to youth going through the court system with Mecklenburg County.
And so their current office is on the west side.
They have an office actually on. Trying to remember, it's off of Arrowhead. That's their main office, but they have space that they utilize on the west side.
Okay.
Arrowwood.
All right. Thank you. So Arrowwood, and then when you said temporary, that was just for the.
Right, correct. They have other space that they've been utilizing on the west side of town.
Okay. Thank you.
I believe that is our last question, so I appreciate the update, Mr. Rios. Our next meeting will be on September 7th. As you can see on the agenda, we'll try to get CDOT to join us to give us their perspective on some of the unsafe speeding and how we can look at different solutions, possibly technology-based solutions around traffic calming, both on our residential streets, our interstates, and everything in between. I will get Ms. Jackson and Ms. Kunze to, as I mentioned earlier, send out the article, the series that was put out by the Observer, because I think that's critical, particularly for our committee members to have read. I think it provides both data and anecdotal stories of some of the things that are broken in this larger system that are leading to these sorts of dangerous conditions on our roads. So I hope that everyone will take a bit of time to read that and better understand the problem so that we can start trying to better identify solutions. Because it's a problem that doesn't seem to be going away, and I know our police officers are doing everything they can, but again, their hands are tied to some degree once they write someone a ticket or once they arrest somebody. If that person's not held accountable, then they're just simply likely to go back out and do the same thing again, and we've seen that and now have a lot of evidence to back that up. So,
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, will you be forwarding or suggesting or recommending to the Intergovernmental Relations Committee that some of the things we talked about today for their consideration?
yes, we will.
Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Chair, I have a question for the next month's presentation. Can we get an update on the priority intersection for from CDOT?
Can you say that again, please?
Like an update, so Sugar Creek and Browns Ferry. I've heard 2 accidents in the past 2 weeks at this intersection, and since I've lived here, there's been a lot. So I forwarded to CDOT every time that happens, and I know that it's high on the list.
Oh, the high injury network. You want the list of?
I don't know if it's high injury, because if there's no fatalities, I don't think it meets that benchmark, because I think we've heard that. So I would maybe an update on the high injury, but also the priority areas for intersections. Because it's my understanding, and I could be wrong, I'd love to hear this, that if there aren't any fatalities, it doesn't rise to the level necessarily of that high injury impact. However, if there are multiple accidents, it seems like we want to make that a priority before there is a fatality. So I'd just like an update on the priority intersections and the high injury, just information on CDOT's tools and strategies regarding the traffic calming. That would be great.
Yeah, any metrics as to what sort of, or what corridors or intersections we've identified as problem areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. We will do that. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.